Next speaker this morning is Dr. Iaian McInnes. Dr. McGinnis has been with us. He was here Wednesday for the National Young Rheumatology Investigator Forum, and it was an excellent session with the fellows. I think they all enjoyed meeting him and getting to know him. He's a head of the Division of Immunology, Infection and Inflammation, and Professor of Experimental Medicine at Glasgow Biomedical Research Centre at the University of Glasgow, Scotland. He received his bachelor's and his medical degree and his PhD, his residency and his rheumatology training at the University of Glasgow. He was a fellow at the NIH. He's a winner of numerous awards, including the EULAR Research Award and the Michael Mason Prize of the British Society of Rheumatology. He's been on and headed up the working group for BSR on psoriatic arthritis treatment guidelines. And he's going to give us a talk this morning about new therapeutic targets in rheumatoid arthritis. Can the promise of immunology deliver more? Ian.
Thank you very much indeed, David. It's, trust me, ladies and gentlemen, an extraordinary pleasure to be here and not in Glasgow. I want to take you back a number of months. I was sitting in my office in the Biomedical Research Centre. This is it here. This is my building. I own it. I live there pretty much. The snow was in the ground. The wind was rattling along at a fairly Glasgow average of 80 miles per hour. The ice storm was battering the window. So it's a fairly average summer afternoon in Glasgow. And David's email arrives and says, would you like to come to the Panhandle in Florida sometime next April? So the first thing I did was I went on Google and I said, what's the temperature? The second thing I did was I phoned my wife and said, do you want to go to Florida next April? And the third thing I did was to email back the answer, which was yes. All of that took about 20 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. So what I want to do today, I'm first and foremost a clinician. I do 3, sometimes 4 clinics a week, and my clinics are horribly heavily populated. We'll see 70 or 80 patients between myself and a couple of fellows in the morning, and then the same in an afternoon. It's a very rich clinical environment to see the full gamut. And what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to take you on a journey into my lab, and I hope you'll forgive me that. Because when I first got the idea, what should I talk about, I kind of said the 2 things I'm interested in, new targets and cardiovascular disease, and David faithfully reproduced that in your handouts. And then I was sitting on the plane on the way over, and I thought, these good people have come from all over the States. Do they just want to hear me rattling on about the latest drug company products that are coming along? And it occurred to me somewhere over Greenland that that's probably what you didn't want to hear. So, although this is firmly grounded in the clinic, and although I'm firmly grounded as a clinician, I'm going to take you on a very dodgy, dangerous journey into my laboratory. And I'm going to tell you what we're doing there. So for CME purposes, the little bit that says, will this influence my practice tomorrow? The answer is no. Will it influence my practice 10 years from now? The answer is I sincerely hope so. And as Mythbusters on Discovery often say, don't try this at home. Alrighty, so this is the hand of a patient with rheumatoid. And with apologies to any of you who have heard this starting anecdote before, it's a very powerful message. A patient came to see me now almost a year ago. He's a patient who'd helped me out in a number of clinical trials. He regularly gave of peripheral blood and occasionally synovial fluid for the lab. And he looked me in the eye. He's a tall man. He looked me in the eye and he said, you've never asked me why I help you, doc. And I said, no, I haven't. I've asked you for permission to take samples, but it's not in our prerogative to say, why are you helping us? That's your decision. He said, well, I want to tell you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're in Glasgow and a tall man says, I want to tell you something, just say yes. It's always safer. So I said, just tell me, yeah. He said, well, I want to tell you. And he did this. He put a photograph down on the table, and this is the photograph he showed me. And the photograph, he said, was of the hand of his newborn grandson. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're into research. I want you to promise me that this will never happen to that." That came from a man in the East End of Glasgow. He's not very well off, but I think he's very rich in insight into the challenges that face us for the next decade. And that's why I do what I do. So I thought we would start with a little bit of history. And this is a fantastic article. If you're ever bored and you've got your wonderful bag that opens with a laptop in your airport, go to the BMJ website and look up Dudley Hart's article in 19-something or other. And in it, he gives you the ABC of cures. Now, all of my favorites are in here, ladies and gentlemen. All of my favorites are in here. For example, fasting, which my wife insists I do fairly regularly. Gin, which is her preferred option, although she's not in the room, I'm allowed to say that. Some of you will meet her at dinner and you'll find just what a terrible man I am to say that. Actually, Speransky's pump. Anyone know what Speransky's pump is? That's right, CSF. You pump CSF in and out and alter CSF pressure, believe it or not. Vitamins are in there, vaccines are in there, whales are in there. I wanted to pick out my particular favorites. These are my favorites. It turns out that you can take the claw from an Australian crow. This is an earthworm. This is actually a Glasgow cure from the early 20s. And what you do is you take worms and you put them in a glass jar. You leave them for 2 weeks precisely. Not a day more, not a day less. The trick is to keep the top of the jar lid tight. What you end up with is mush. The mush is then ground for 10 minutes precisely. This is all written down in an ancient script. It's extraordinary stuff. And that eventually, ladies and gentlemen, can be taken orally or parenterally, and you can take your own pick. Walking barefoot in Christmas snow, or April snow, as it was actually snowing as we left Glasgow on Sunday. And finally, everyone's heard of copper bracelets. What is maybe less well known to you is that how you wear copper matters. So if you wear the copper around a wrist, that is for peripheral arthritis. If, on the other hand, you have it tied around your neck in a string, that is very good for axial disease. You'll find that Scottish people have combined the two, because if you wrap it around your waist and rub your wrist against it and keep a penny with a bit of string attached to it, you can cure your arthritis, give someone a tip, and get the money back without them knowing. So, okay, so finally we better do some rheumatology, hadn't we? We're going to have 3 little bits to what I'm going to talk about. And all being well, this will get us through to coffee time in one piece. I'm going to very briefly talk about how I perceive clinical needs going forward. I hope that's not a surprise to you. If it sounds unduly cynical, that's just because I am. And that's because I still have lots and lots and lots of patients who are not in remission. And so do you, if you stop and think about it. Then I'm going to tell you about the immune system and why we have one, and then I'm going to talk about opportunities. And the opportunities are experiments that have come from my lab. Now, this, of course, is early, the original idea of a magic bullet. This is the late 40s. This is, of course, steroid. And we have a Nobel Prize in rheumatology from a long time ago. A further 50 years went by after the miracle of steroids before we had anything else that really made a dramatic impact on a single drug basis, at least. I'll come back to that later on, in fact, in my second talk after coffee. And then we had if you like, the biologic revolution, the molecular revolution that has undoubtedly changed our practice. Not, I would argue, as much as changes in strategy. But I'm going to talk about molecules today rather than strategies. Okay. So it's a pretty impressive armamentarium that we have now. We have TNF blockers, IL-6 receptor blockers, B-cell depleters. We can block co-stimulation. And there's a bucket load of other molecules coming through that will follow those. The problem is that we still commonly achieve partial responses, rarely achieve remission. And I think most of us would agree that the risks and costs of therapy, if your starting point is complete health, are still rather high. You see, the problem, we're chronic disease docs. We're used to the idea that someone comes to see us for 15 or 20 years. But do you remember that wonderful moment that the patient had, that glorious moment, just before they came in to see you for the very first time when they thought you were going to cure them? They still thought at that stage that they had a sore throat and a week of penicillin would make it better. And then we spend years disabusing them of that notion.